You have to get this frog out of this can. I give you an hour's time. So this boy goes to find a snake charmer and brings a snake. Lets it into the tube, and then the frog is cleaned up, the snake is inside. But I never looked at this as indiscipline, and because this is a very creative mind. So what do we do with it now in our school system? And because the construction of what is discipline and what is indiscipline in a school system, and then about this is one side of the concept, because this is where the relationship between the teachers and the administration and the students, and because we have a very constructed perspective of what is the discipline that we are looking at the students to come from. And then when the school that I set up for the rural children, and I go there about 3 days in a week, and I see the children putting their hands behind and walking after the morning prayer. I asked the teachers, why have you asked the children to put their hands behind? They said, to stop them from engaging some pranks. So you tie their hands down, like in the prisons. So just without the ribbon, and you're making the children. I think there's something about that age that we are dealing with, when we want them to be free, when we want them to evolve, and the system has certain constructions of what is discipline, the framework that we provide. And this is very important for us to develop the culture for teachers and administration, the culture of compassion and understanding, and what is violation, what is not a violation. This is one issue, the foremost concern. And then my experience is that about the school system is that without any undermining our education system, our school system is very, very violent. Extremely violent. I mean, this is a country that, we say we led a national movement for freedom through a non-violent means, but our education system is not at all non-violent. It is extremely violent. And I share this because the fear element is one of the highest components in relationship between the teacher and the student, and which is very high. And we can say that it doesn't exist, but it exists at a very deep level. And then the Haiti example you are saying, and this is very much true in India. And without any separation of regions, and it only varies in small percentage. May not happen in Delhi with the same percentage, but it happens. It happens in a higher percentage, maybe in another place. And even the society is also responsible for this. In a sense, what you say, the parents, and I have heard parents say that, just spare the eyes. I mean, which is very violent. The community that I work with, the UNICEF came for, UNICEF was adopting our school as one of the methodology for the non-violence in the school education. But the system is that the same parents in the community says, just spare the eyes, and as well as I want the child to be educated. So the teachers are also complementing the social dynamism. And there is a very deep violence, because our Indian society is a very violent society, and very hierarchical, very oppressive, very discriminatory. And so you're talking about education system, and which is compassionate, democratic, is a kind of a very superficial concern. So this is, we really have to address this in a far more serious way. And the third concern that I want to talk about is that I went to a school, I come from a social activist, a political activist family. My father's elder brother was a freedom fighter, was a Gandhian. Then we didn't have, after coming back, he didn't have a job for about after independence. And I asked him about why didn't you have a job? He said, we didn't know we'll get freedom. So, so I never looked for a job. So we had to work in the movement, and then we didn't have enough resources to, in the second generation only I could go to school. And I was the first generation to go to school. I went to a very ordinary school and a Jesuit school. And in the school, that what used to happen is that by the June, in the month of June, in the mid-June, by the 20th of June, they will ask all the children who did not buy books to come and kneel down in the summer and in the ground, the playground. And I had books that time, but I kept my books away. I went and joined the other children who were kneeling down, because the books that I had is on the margin of few rupees. Maybe I had that more than the other children. And I went back, and then I asked the teacher, I still remember that very consciously, that how is it possible? I spoke to the other Jesuit priest more recently, or the Don Bosco. I narrated this. I said, I'm not saying the Jesuits do that. Buddhists can do this, Jesuits can do this, the Hindus can do it, anybody can do this. But when you are running a school, and running a school for the poor, irrespective of the poor or the rich, but if you're going to punish children for not wearing a uniform, for not carrying the books, you don't have to run a school. That school should be closed. And in a sense, that our system is very, very violent. Our system is very violent, the fear. And another important thing is that, one of us said, school is a miniature form of a society. I remember more recently from Rishi Valley, the Rishi Valley, which is another fascinating incident. One of my friends, they have the daughter studying in Rishi Valley. The school had they went to pick the children during summer vacation. And in Rishi Valley, administration said, we can't give admission to your daughter next year because we have some disciplinary issues. And then she's a kind of a troubleshooter to the school in the last few months. We are not happy. We don't want to renew the admission. But my friend, their family was, I think, they argued from different perspective. They said, listen, my daughter is in your school for 9 months. 9 to 10 months she's staying with your school. And she is at our home for 2 months, of which she travels most of the time. If you say that there is a disciplinary issues, you can't take her back, you should take more responsibility because you're keeping her here for 9.5 months. And she is still not disciplined. And in 2 months, when she comes, how can I turn her to be more disciplined? So you have to be more responsible to me, not only to my daughter. So the school administration said, we will rethink over this decision. Because there is a very different dynamism of looking at the disciplinary issues and how responsible that we have to take towards the children. So these are the few issues about and then the last concern is that in terms of the corporal punishment, and I definitely feel that unless and until we achieve this, like we say about the polio eradication in this country, the TB eradication, and this is a very, very serious problem. There's a very serious problem. Like in government of Tamil Nadu also recently said, let's bring in they brought a law. They said you can't have a corporal punishment. I spoke to a lot of teachers, and the teachers, they felt more that some power they had in the hand was deprived. They didn't, they said, look at those boys, and they're not even turning on my side and saying, hello, because, or saying, wishing me the way they have done all these years. And and the corporal punishment is more about, there are hundreds of ways to deal with our children without punishing them, without creating a fear. I think if any reforms that has to come in the school administration and management, that has to look at the addressing and dealing with our children more non-violently and more compassionately. And if a teacher cannot dislocate their own ego and then about the hierarchy, no one in the society will do that. Thank you very much.
Something in your hand, and I wonder if it's at that point you have 80 odd principles, something like that, 80 odd. So whether you can have, for this convincing exercise, whether you can have maybe 4 smaller groups of 20 each and really go into retreat. I like the way you said, close the doors and don't open it till you have everybody on board. But not even physically, not like this. I think sitting on the floor, sitting together in a relaxed, leisurely way. It's really like a retreat where you discuss, you explain why all these things came into that document, and yeah, have a dialogue with them. Something you have to do for this convincing exercise. Yeah, then the next thing is I have several suggestions for how, you know, that point about fostering teacher inquiry and collaboration. Someone has already said this. I think we should have a library for teachers, not only books, but excellent articles and audiovisual material. Then just having that library is not enough. So how do you make sure that they actually use the stuff? So if the school head can do something like, in rotation, two teachers at a time have to pick a particular reading, prepare and present to the rest. And following the presentation, there's discussion among all the teachers on that topic, so that everybody is picking up something once in 2 weeks, once a month, something like that. Then, yeah, would it be possible for them to invite, say, a biology, a college professor of biology, or even a researcher in history, somebody who's an expert in a particular subject, say, all these suggestions I'm giving for teachers only, not for the children, so that your biology teachers or your science teachers or your history teachers will get an opportunity to learn more about their subject and to interact with this, you know, expert. Then another idea would be, if you can have, you may be doing these things already, I don't know, organize curriculum meetings every year to give teachers a sense that they are recreating the school every year. And just open up everything and say, okay, we can go subject by subject or age group by age group, but we are starting to discuss afresh. So what happened last year, what worked, what didn't, what shall we change this year? The emphasis on that that kind of, yeah, these are some of the things that we do in our school. I'm trying to understand why the fact that we are teacher run is so precious to me. It's because I feel that each one of us owns the school. I mean, there is no they to blame. How much do they pay you, or how much, what, oh, they told me I can't take leave. There is no they. Is there some way to create that environment, even though there is a school head and so on?
Thank you. Lamang.
I think Dharamsala really provided us a very useful perspective in terms of how leadership exists in the actual school settings, and what really works, and what kind of leadership qualities we should be looking for. And I think that's very helpful as a kind of like a launching point in terms of, you know, this project. And then Professor Krishna Kumar provided us some useful constructs, you know, in a very general way. That might actually help us to rethink, reshape, you know, what this management leadership in the classroom setting or in the schools, you know, look like, and what are the details that we need to pay very close attention to. So, you know, so I think those are very useful suggestions. And then Sampila has provided us some very pragmatic, really, I thought they were just wonderful suggestions in terms of, you know, how we can begin to implement, you know, this kind of a restructuring, so to speak, in our Tibetan schools. And so those are kind of useful things to keep in mind. And now, what I thought I would really focus my kind of a, you know, observation is really relating to this conducting systematic instructional observation and constructive teacher evaluation by school heads. And I like to pick from where, you know, Dharamsala actually brought to our attention. How can we really engage in a teacher observation or you know, evaluation without injecting this fear? I think that's a very important element. And so, you know, I was thinking how we can really do this, you know, in the classrooms. One, you know, would be teachers and whoever is evaluating the teacher, they really must come together, work together, and identify what needs to be observed. So the teacher must be involved in the process of evaluation. because then evaluation becomes very helpful. Otherwise, you and I might be looking for the wrong things. And if the teacher says, I really need to improve my classroom management or my lesson planning or maybe my classroom delivery, and then that's a wonderful beginning point. Then the teacher will be, brought into the process. And I think that's really very important. And then, of course, we will implement this evaluation, in a very sensitive, responsive manner. And then, of course, during the evaluation, we can also talk about what might be the next step. So thinking about this, I think, somehow we need to really institute definitely a teacher development kind of idea or plan. So in which, teachers would be encouraged to develop what might be their professional goals within the next 6 months or 1 year, whatever, period we might really think of. And then, of course, we want to ask them, what are the things that you want to do in terms of really helping you to get to some of those, objectives. And that is a really wonderful plan for them. And then, of course, we can actually include this observation as a facet of this, teacher development, teacher professionalization kind of stuff. So I think that would be helpful. And another thing, I want to say just a couple of things. Many times people are really resistant to change. I mean, that is really given. Nobody wants to do something differently. For example, from my own experience, whenever they would introduce some new technology, I'm like really dead scared. I don't want to, do that stuff. So then what my university would do is they would really provide a lot of in-services. People would come and hold my hand and say, now I'm home, and just push this button and stuff like that. And that really helped really reduce my anxiety a lot. And so what I'm trying to say here is, we need to find factors that would inhibit people from changing their attitudes, behavior, belief system. Because we all work from this belief system. So these are sometimes really hindrances, serious hindrances. So we need to find ways to change that attitude, change their belief system. And I remember reading actually several years ago, there is something called force field theory. I think some of you might know. It was actually presented by a German, Kurt Lewins. I think that's, if I'm, and I thought that is really very instructive for us. What he said is, this, things are actually, maintained in equilibrium due to these two forces. One is a driving force, another one is a restraining force. And in order to change this equilibrium, what we need to do is we need to increase the driving force by paying attention to the restraining forces. What are the things that really kind of are part of this restraining force? So I was thinking, like in terms of Sambila's suggestion, so if we can embed this as a part of your pragmatic suggestion, I think this would provide some wonderful, hopefully, at least template in terms of thinking about implementation. Otherwise, I really don't know anything about management. I've never managed even my own home life properly. So I'm not in a position to say a lot of stuff, I'm struggling with my, stuff. So thank you.
Next discussion session, you might find some sheets of paper on your table, which are questions again, very pertinent, very direct questions on what do you think should be the action points for each of the sessions that have, the 4 sessions that have. You don't have that paper with you? You have. Everybody has that paper. But we will do that after the 3 interjections have been done. Hey. And also at the beginning of the session, there was 2 other documents which I had kind of distributed. One was a management, a chapter on management for my book, and the other one was a model school profile which had been created some time ago. So we're now going to ask the Vice Chancellor Furkan Kumarji to make his intervention.
When Professor Ramu was sharing his anecdote of children being creative that reminded me of another incident that again happened at a railway station. That was 1975. It so happened that I saw a group of people who were traveling without ticket, and they were rounded up at the railway station, and they were being booked. And the moment they saw it, that they are being booked, they started raising slogans, "Emergency Murdabad, Indira Gandhi, hi hi." And as a result, I was told that they were later on booked for opposing emergency rather than traveling without tickets. I'm not sure whether these adults were the same kids who demonstrated that creativity or they were different kids. What we know is that creativity and discipline, I mean, they are opposite to one another, and I think the real challenge is making a balance between these two. I mean, leaving everything without any kind of discipline. I'm not saying that be violent, but inculcating or enforcing some kind of discipline or making, because one of the purpose of education should also be to produce responsible children. Just another anecdote, because sometimes what we intend to get out of our action and what actually happens might not exactly be the same. Again, a very old joke coming from Pakistan, that some community decided that in order to develop compassion in children, the least that a school can do is that, okay, whenever any elderly or aged passes away in that neighborhood, the school would be closed. So that they did, and they thought that they are developing compassion in children, till they one day found or discovered that some of these school children saw two elderly people sitting at a corner, and they said that, look, two of our holidays are sitting there. I think we will have to be extremely careful about that thing. In fact, when Arvind started speaking, and he said that, look, any kind of idea to corporatize the school is a bad idea. And then this one paper is from CII, and my discipline is business management, business administration. It is indeed true that educational institutions are not like corporate entities. But this difference is that our objective cannot be to produce goods, to make profit, or do things like this. But then to that extent that we provide instruction in an organized setting, schools are an organized places, and nobody can say that the schools do not have objectives. Their objectives are different, but then they do have objectives. So some kind of principles of management shall have to be developed and evolved for getting the kind of output or getting the kind of outcome or objectives being met from a school. Now the challenge is that quite often our objectives are not sometimes clearly defined, may not be measurable or quantifiable in that sense of the word in which the corporate sector defines that, okay, the CEO's performance is to be assessed in terms of the bottom line or the turnover statistics. That is agreeable, but there are indeed objectives that schools have to achieve. And applying all kinds of, or there is no harm in learning from the corporate experience or managerial style as far as achievement of the objectives, not only in terms of letter, but also in spirit is concerned. There is no harm. I do not see any harm in this. Another thing that I would like to say is that the best approaches to management, despite all the principles that we know, is said to be situational. Every situation demands a different kinds of approach. So we can learn from the best experiences, we can know that what has worked in certain settings, but we can never be sure that what has worked in X place will positively be working at a Y place. And therefore, following that rigid principle of management may not work. So I think the creativity at the leadership level, at the management level, is extremely important to sense that what is the situation and what kind of action and what kind of decisions are needed. But we will have to discuss the whole thing, not only focusing on the principles, rather the whole leadership, management, and governance taken together, starting from the political decision making to the directorate, inspectorate, schools, and teachers being part of that whole leadership, management, governance. To improve or to get the best out of the school setting. So from the top, I think we need to create an enabling kind of environment, what everybody is talking about, that you enable the schools to perform and to achieve what the school is expected to achieve. For that, perhaps you will have to empower your principals, you have to empower your teachers, you also have to empower your students. And the moment you do that, since all these three stakeholders are present physically, unlike business entities, where the third dimension, the consumer, is located at a distance, and you can only get some kind of a feedback in some another sense, but immediate conflict does not arise between the management and the employee. But here in any educational institution, all of these three. So there are possibilities of inter-stakeholder conflict. And I think quite often, and most of the time, that goes into the leadership, from the leadership side and from the management side, is managing these conflict. And that, in a sense, becomes all the more important because there are individual goals and there are organizational goals. Ideally, we should create a conditions whereby the individual goals are fully aligned to organizational goals and organizational objectives. But then that happens only when each stakeholders are equally responsible towards themselves, towards the institutions. They take the responsibility of their actions. Sadly, that kind of people are not always available. So one biggest challenge is that what do we need to do from the leadership level, from the management level, to ensure that, okay, to the extent possible, the organizational goals and the institutional goals could be aligned. That requires a lot of communication skills. That requires, and I think Ms. Tarlam and Maya, they mentioned it, I mean, that requires you to demonstrate some kind of abilities to convey amongst students, amongst teachers of the school, that this is what we are trying to achieve. And we are not demanding from you something which you are not supposed to do. It has to be, I mean, educational institutions are one such organization where it matters greatly that you practice what you preach. Because people believe more what they see rather than what they hear. I mean, I have not seen any teacher who goes to a class and says that, okay, coming late to a class is okay, telling a lie, finding an excuse is fine, not submitting your assignment is okay. Nobody does that. But still, if the children are seeing the teacher herself coming a little late, not being so punctual, not being so responsible, so that message gets so much ingrained because they believe what they see you doing. So I think from the principal side, as well as from the teacher side, I mean, the principal should be doing what the principal preaches. The teachers should be doing what they expect the children, the classrooms to do this. In management literature, it is full of that people can be classified into a combination which can be represented on two axes. One is the people orientation, and the other one is the task orientation. Those who are people oriented, they value relationships, empathy, all of these things more. Those who are task oriented, they focus more on that this must be achieved, that must be achieved, this deadline must be followed. And when they plot the personality on this managerial grid of XY, then they say that it's 9-9, where you are high on task orientation and at the same time also high on people orientation are better. If you are only people oriented, then there is a problem. Then you go on extending certain kinds of concession, and so frequent a concession that the ultimate objectives of the organization is not achieved. For example, there might be every day a teacher coming or some kids coming that, okay, can't attend classes, they have this thing to do, they are falling sick, etc. People orientation would require you to empathize, sympathize with them and say, okay, no problem, don't attend class, go home, take rest. But then what happens to the organizational goal? So I think making this balance where you are high on people orientation, don't be manipulative, but at the same time, don't lose sight of the goal and objectives that the organization has to achieve. And this is a difficult task, particularly if you are working in a school setting. From the administration side, I mean, of course, the Tibetan school administration is a small organization. I'm very sure that this does not have those kinds of constraining or stifling kind of rules, regulations. But sometime when the institution grow, when the number grow, and you make systems, then you commit that kind of mistakes. I remember once interacting with directors of schools in Nepal, and I was talking about leadership, management, decision making, and one of the directors said that you do not know what you are talking about, you are not at all aware of the ground realities. Let me share one of my stories to you. And then he said that, look, I was principal of a school before I became director. There was one school which was known for all the bad things, poor results, indiscipline amongst staff, teachers, students, everyone. So I was sent there. And in my own way, and I'm not aware what was his managerial style, but he was saying that he brought schools to a level where people started recognizing that school. And then he said that he only in the process recognized that there are 5 teachers who are still creating problems, those kinds of people who neither work nor let others work. So the director said, the principal said that as principal, I only had the power to recommend that these 5 teachers be transferred from my school. And after 3 weeks, what I got was that I was transferred from that school. And later on, he said that later on when I myself became director, I realized that when this file and the recommendation for transferring 5 teachers reached to the director's table, then he said that transferring